Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would answer a question that came up in a video I did yesterday. I did a coverage of Nick's video about Eddie Hall, and I talked about bodybuilding, and I also talked about strength sports and the negative health consequences that they can have. And the question came up of which is more unhealthy, professional bodybuilding, like at the IFBB level, like Mr. Olympia level, or world's strongest man. Interesting question. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. I mean, if we're going to talk about actual fitness and health, guys, I think it's fair to say that both of these levels of competition, one being a sport, one being a performing art. See, I'll be nice. I won't make fun of it. It's a performing art. It's not a sport, but it's a performing art. Which one is more unhealthy? In a way, that's a ridiculous question. I'm still going to actually analyze the question because I think it's an important question for people to ask who want to look at these different things. But it is really a ridiculous question also because both of these are extremely unhealthy. They're extremely unhealthy, right? And people need to understand that if you choose to even try to get involved in either one of these, it is going to dramatically reduce your lifespan, and it's going to cause you a lot of problems later in life because they're both devastating to your health. So that's kind of my thing of when this topic comes up. If I'm a strength athlete, I respect strength. It's something I'm into. But by that same token, even I will say, hey, there are limits, guys. There are limits to what you can do before it does become destructive. And I think that's what we need to think about in terms of fitness and everything. And I've really been pushing all of that direction lately. That's the other reason I'm cutting down. I'm losing body fat. I'm down over 30 pounds because I understand at this point that, hey, my absolute strength isn't more important than my health and fitness, right? It's not. It isn't. And you can be pretty strong and be lean without being massive. You don't have to be roid level massive to be strong, to be just respectably strong, or at least what I consider respectably strong. But back over to the point of which one is more unhealthy. Well, you need to look at the different factors. Now, people will say, well, they both use the same amount of drugs, so that's the same. Well, that's not actually true because you're only talking about growth in strength substances, right? You're talking about things like your testosterone, steroids, HGH, IGF-1, insulin, all that stuff. The stuff that grows muscle. Yeah, they both use extreme amounts. In either one of these competitive endeavors, people are using extreme amounts of either one. Extreme amounts. So in that regard, yeah, they're both insanely unhealthy just from that factor alone. And people who don't understand that, it is not possible for someone to become competitive in professional bodybuilding without abusing these substances. I don't mean just using, but gross abuse. Just like you can drink alcohol versus you can abuse alcohol. There's a difference. And I mean, in moderation, alcohol could have some health consequences, but not the consequences you're going to have from abuse. And it's the same with these other substances. You're not going to suffer the same health effects from moderate amounts versus if you use 20 times the same amount. Well, that's what you're talking about in bodybuilding. These aren't casual users of these things. They're use massive amounts, all of them, every single last one of them, because they can't compete in that without it. Well, the same thing with World's Strongest Man. So from that perspective, yes, but then you do have to factor in that bodybuilders use other dangerous substances besides things that grow muscle, whereas in the strongman competitors may not, other than maybe they might use some stims. Now we can get into that argument of what are the health consequences to a guy who already has high blood pressure from all the other stuff, who's using stims, who weighs 400 plus pounds. Okay, now that's a possible recipe for disaster. But as far as other things go, people need to remember, what else do bodybuilders use? Well, they use all sorts of fat burners that have effects on your organs. They use diuretics. All right, a lot of them use diuretics to make weight. Now, that is damaging to your organs. That can cause health problems. That can actually cause heart attacks. That has actually made people have heart attacks at their actual competitions. All right, you're messing with your electrolyte balance. That can affect your brain. It can affect your heart. So that's separate. So they've got other substances there. So when people talk about the drug abuse aspect of either one of these, well, no, the bodybuilding is worse, and it's not because the strongmen use less anabolic substances, is that bodybuilders use more things than they do. They add other stuff to the mix because they need to be ripped, peeled, dry, whatever terms they want to use. And that can include everything from fat-burning substances all the way up to diuretics and everything else. So they have a whole nother degree of risk. Now the other point will come up of body weight and everything, but people need to remember that we're also dealing with tall versus short people, all right? So some of that is a little different. People need to remember a lot of these strongman competitors who are 400 pounds, if they were the height of a normal person with the same proportions in muscle and fat, percentages, they wouldn't be 400 pounds. These guys are all tall. I think most of them are at least 6'2". Usually seems to be the minimum for world's strongest man, around that ballpark, and most of them are even taller than that. So being taller itself does put more of a strain on your heart and everything, whereas in bodybuilders are still equally massive for their height in terms of overall size. It's just that they have smaller frames. Most pro bodybuilders are pretty short. I've gone into different events over the years and can honestly say the majority of professional bodybuilders I've met are shorter than I am, and I'm not a particularly tall guy. I've seen Kai Green. I've got stuck in a line behind Kai Green, and I was looking down to the top of his head. All right, so a lot of them are very short, and then you start thinking about that in terms of, well, a 5'7" guy who's 300 pounds versus a 6'3" guy who's 400 pounds. We're getting tit for tat in terms of ratios there, but the argument could be made that the strong men are putting more of a strain on their heart and everything else because of the extra size, the extra body fat, just the extra body weight. So that's a point against them. So again, we're kind of at that threshold there. But by that same token, we come back around to bodybuilding. They also diet down every single competition to body fat levels that are unhealthy. Just like you can have too much fat, and we all agree having too much fat is unhealthy, dieting down super, super lean is also unhealthy, and it can harm your health and damage your organs, especially if you do it repeatedly or for long periods of time. When you got bodybuilders dropping down to 5 or 6% body fat, that can actually harm your health. That can actually hurt you. That can damage organs. That can damage your endocrine system. So while we could argue about the strong men carrying too much fat and body weight year round, we could also go look at bodybuilding and say, but they also diet down to emaciated levels that even though they have a lot of muscle, that can harm their health. So do you see where we start running into problems? It's like, because people will say things and they'll look at this and say, oh, well, yeah, they both use the same amount of drugs, but strong men, they carry more body weight, so therefore that's more strain on their body, so it's probably more unhealthy. But then you go look at the bodybuilding end, and they also use a lot of different drugs that have other side effects and health risks besides all the growth drugs. And then while they may not carry as much weight and body fat, so maybe less strain on the heart there, but they also diet down ultra lean that also has its own health risks. You guys see the problem with trying to ask a question like this? It really doesn't work, because when we start stacking up factors, we're getting into so many multiple variables that each one of these endeavors have that are individually so unhealthy and carry so many health risks that I don't think you can actually quantify this. I think because there are multiple overlapping extremely high health risk behaviors in both of these type of competitors at that level, to actually say that one is more unhealthy or more risky than the other, I don't think you can actually say that. Because how would you even calculate that? And I think it's fair to say when we start with the thing they already have in common, the massive anabolic abuse, we already know they're both extremely unhealthy. They are both extremely high risk. They're both extremely high risk because of that. And then each one of them adds in at least 2 other major risk factors that could actually risk your health and harm you even without all the anabolic substances present. So how do you even stack that up? Because we have to then factor in, how much harder is it on your body, in addition to using all this massive amount of substances, to use all these other fat burners and diuretics, to still carry a lot of extra body weight beyond a healthy amount, too high of a BMI, even when ripped, dieting down to body fat levels that can actually harm your health and damage organs, versus, again, using large amounts of anabolics and maybe carrying too much body weight And too much body fat for years and years on end, combined with all the high blood pressure and other risk and everything else. How do you quantify that? And any person who says that they legitimately believe, based upon the evidence, that one of these two is a lot more unhealthy than the other, I'm going to call BS on. You can't. You can't. And so that would even be my problem with something like the World's Strongest Man. I mean, I don't like bodybuilding. I don't follow bodybuilding. I've at least watched some of the World's Strongest Man contests. And for me, while I might say, okay, I can respect the athletic performance, I can respect that, because I don't respect the bodybuilding because it's just a pageant. I also look at that and say I'm not a fan. And that's an interesting way to look at it. I'm not a fan of it. I might respect the athleticism, but I also look at it and go, man, these guys are just destroying themselves. This is going to catch up with them and it's going to hurt them. So that makes it difficult for me to even be a fan of it, because I can look at it and say, man, I can appreciate that, but I'm not a fan. Because again, I see these guys basically shortening their lifespans by such an enormous margin. And yeah, it's cool that they could be the world's strongest man. I mean, that's cool and everything, and it is, and I can respect that. But I also step back and go, has it gone too far? And I think it has. It's gone too far, to the point where a lot of these guys are really going to suffer health consequences. And me, as someone who I do believe fitness is important, I kind of have to give a thumbs down to that. You know, I really do. And that's just the reality of it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.